Welcome to Bitcoin Escape Plan. Something very interesting is happening to Bitcoin at the moment, and we're going to talk about it in today's video. If you're new here, I always start off with the 4-hour chart just to reward anyone who is here early in the video. And then we'll go into the higher time frames after this. The topic of today's video is my price predictions for 2026, which is probably, you're not going to like it, but that's okay. Keep watching, like, and subscribe. So on the 4-hour, what's been going on? Saturday, flat as usual. Actually, it looks like we rose into early Saturday and most of the day Saturday. That's what's kind of taking us into this reattempt at 92 that we're at. What is that? That's 91.8. It's obviously, it was pretty boring and lackluster in December. We didn't really get much other than, confirmation that we were above the low of November. That's the only thing I think we can kind of extrapolate as like a positive to December, is showing some strength there. But what we really need to pay attention to in the short term, this is 90.8. 90.8 we have talked about multiple times. That's, I believe, a higher time frame fib pivot in the past as well. Not a more, I don't think it's a more significant level. Well, maybe it is. Might have had that marked off for something else. Point is, there's a number of reasons why that position in particular on the chart is going to be important. This one here, 89.8K, is right around where the SMA is at the moment. The SMA is at a little bit over 90K and is rising still. So what I would imagine is going to happen is we're going to have a cross of the price once this SMA reaches that 90.8 or right around there. So this is the thing. I have a short-term bullish bias, but I'm going to get into, over the course of the video, I'm going to focus more on what do I think is going to happen throughout the course of the year. The general course of the year is bearish. This next, I would say 9 to 12 week period is a potential for another bull rally, essentially the bull rally that we didn't get in December. We have an attempt at that again now, but I do still think it's going to fail. So in the next 4 hours, what I would really be focusing on is a reaction to either 89.8 if it drops that low, but more realistically, I think that SMA is going to get pulled up to 90.8, and then it may not reach that fib pivot again if it were to break it to the downside once those two have crossed, and then potentially a push to 92.4 if there is enough momentum. All right, before we get into the rest of the video, you can go check out bitcoinescapeplan.com. I've been writing newsletters for a couple weeks now. Some of them are paid previews where I go into a little bit more depth on topics other than just Bitcoin, stablecoins, Ethereum, SPY, etc., etc. And then every week I do just release one that's specifically about Bitcoin. That's similar to what you read on this channel. Go check it out. All right, back to the charts, and then we'll actually jump out to the higher time frame. So 2026 price predictions. Oh, would you look at that? New fib pivot opened up just for you. I've talked about this in several other videos, so feel free to browse those ones after this. But what I expect is going to happen, because we have touched the monthly SMA, which is something that just does not happen very often on the charts. It's a pretty significant event every time that it happens, and I'm not going to go any further back than the 2017 cycle because I don't think it's quite as relevant. But the point is, that's something that once that event has occurred, that we have crossed the SMA, the clock is ticking for us to drop significantly far below it for an extended period of time. That's pretty normal when that occurs, for there to be a decent amount of time, almost a year, where we are below it. So my baseline expectation for 2026 at the beginning is this pattern that we saw in 2021 right here. That's what I'm expecting. So this is December. The highest we went was 94.6K. What I would expect, if it's similar to, let's assume that this is the December candle for this guy. This one was a high of 47.9 at the time, just below 48K. This one over here just barely broke 48.2K, but still registered as a failure, essentially, because the next month opened and dropped right back below the SMA. So what I think is going to happen over the next couple months, this is very important, is I think that we are going to go slightly above that 94.6K to right around 96K. And I think that we're going to fail that pivot. I don't know that it's going to happen in January. We may just spend most of the month of January building slow strength towards 96, where it really looks like it's going to work. It really looks good. Looks good, guys. And then maybe February is where we lose it and drop. It might happen sooner in January. You know, it's not going to happen exactly like it did in other cycles. And even like I compare most of what's happening now to the 2017, 2018 cycle, which doesn't look like what we have now. You know, what we have now does look more similar to 2021, but I used 2017 as analysis for all of last year. So it does feel kind of strange to like randomly jump to 2022 is what I'm basing all of my assumptions off of. It's mostly just this shape on the chart is very telling, I think. And it's reaching the SMA while the SMA is still rising, and it really wants to stay above it. Like it so desperately wants to stay above it. But like you can see here, that 47.7K pivot at that time is functionally what that 96K pivot is for us right now. So I don't know that it's going to play out exactly the same as that. We don't have fib pivots for this period back here. But I would imagine it's, you know, roughly an equivalent, like not quite to the top of these candles, around the middle of the major rise, which let's see where that is for us. Well, that's that guy. That's 80. That's why 80 was prevalent, because it's close to the middle of this rising candle. I think it's tough to say, but that is my bias, you know. So my overall bias, which I've talked about in other videos, is I expect us to chop below 96 and sometime between now and March to properly fail 96 and give it up and head back towards 80 and then potentially lower after 80. If we're looking at the historical analysis for the last time that Trump was president, this is what was going on. You know, we didn't connect with the SMA until 2018, like deep into 2018. So again, not relevant to what we're seeing now. This is if it was going to be like a really long and pronounced one. Whereas I think it's going to be more violent for certain periods and then boring for an extended period and maybe peter out a little bit towards the end. It kind of depends on exactly how SPY behaves, which I just made a whole video about that yesterday, where I did an in-depth analysis on how does Bitcoin and the S&P 500 correlate, and I learned a lot during that video. So what I think is going to happen with SPY is probably going to top at some point in the next couple of months. It'll give a little bit back, and then it'll have a summer rally where it'll break past its relative. I mean, for SPY, it would be up here. Not up here because it hasn't had a significant drop. I'm not going to look at that chart in this video, just going to focus on Bitcoin. But what that kind of tells me is the cycle lows for both of them should line up by the end of the year, between October and December. SPY will probably have a sharper decline, whereas Bitcoin, it kind of remains to be seen. You know, we either are going to have, this is a sharper one where it happens over the course of 3 months. It loses like pretty much all its value. It loses 60% of its value in a 3-month time period, versus over here where that equivalent amount takes considerably longer. That takes whatever that is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It takes like 9 months in the 2018 scenario for that to actually occur. And in fairness, you know, a decent chunk of it has already happened this early. Like it already gave up 50% there, and then it's pretty much just holding on to it. So the reality is it can actually happen very quickly, and then it's just a matter of, did you add more somewhere in this candle and are then losing more in the expectation that it's about to go higher, not lower? I do think that we've switched into a time of DCA, because this is the thing you really have to keep in mind when we're talking about price predictions, or just in general trying to anticipate what's going to happen with the price. This is the monthly SMA. When the price interacts with this monthly SMA, it's important. It doesn't happen that often, and it needs to be noted. But one thing that is true is anytime the price is below it, and I mean any time the price is below it, it is an excellent time to buy, historically, period. It's an excellent time to buy. Now, is it an excellent time to put all of your money in? No. But is it good to dollar cost average over this entire time period? Yeah. Your cost basis would be, like 35 to 30K Bitcoin at this time. You'd still be at almost a 3X at the moment. You'd be pretty happy if you had done that, let alone if you had been doing it back here. So we have to keep the broad context of, if you're buying this thing for what it's going to be worth at the end of 2026, you're in for a rude awakening. You're probably not going to be very happy with your returns. But if you're buying this thing for what you believe it's going to be worth in 2028, in 2029, that's a very different circumstance where we have to kind of take the reality of being below the monthly SMA as a good sign, not a bad sign. It is initially going to feel like a bad sign because any new cash that's deployed into Bitcoin right now, you're just going to lose more money in the short term. I think there's a better argument for reducing exposure to risk assets depending on where you are on the curve. It seems like gold and silver and things like that are going to be ripping for an extended time period. Again, I've talked about that more in other videos, but specifically pertaining to Bitcoin, that's what we need to pay attention to. Does it have a strong reaction to 96 where it actually gets higher and allows us to then have hope for this guy? This is 106.7. This is the other one I've been talking about a lot. And if we look at the weekly SMA is already dropping below that 106.7 level. So I think that there is a possibility that as the weekly continues to drop, which I expect it's not going to interact with the weekly until it's somewhere around 95 to 97. And then again, if it prints a failure on that, it's going to push the price lower again. The weekly chart will stay below more often, but it's essentially the same premise, where anytime it's below the weekly SMA is historically a good time to buy. Obviously there are time periods where it rewards you less. It would not have been like common advice for somebody to be buying in 2021 as the price is coming down from 70. Like, it would have been a bad idea right here in December of 2021 to start loading up heavily. But again, that price now, you'd still be up more than a 2x. So you just have to keep that in mind when you're deploying capital at this stage of the cycle. Is what is your time horizon for that capital? How long are you willing to wait before you can have an expected return from it versus potentially needing to take a loss if you need the cash for other things, which I think it's with crypto in general, it should always be money that you can afford to lose. Got to be really ballsy and a little dumb to put your entire net worth in this asset class, unless it's like you really understand how to read cycles and you're on a better part of them. I think at the end of this year, there's going to be a historic opportunity for someone to buy just a fuckload of Bitcoin at bargain basement prices, which let's get into that. My actual expectations for the potential lows for the price this year, baseline is somewhere between here and here, which is about 74K and about 50K, right around 50K. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. So I think that this moment right here, this is March of 2024. The ETFs go live in January. of 2024. The halving event is around March, April of 2024. Previous to this moment, there is no historical precedent for setting a new all-time high in the halving year instead of the post-halving year. We've never seen that before on the chart. So what I think this did two things. One, I think it muted the amount of like parabolic run that we were going to have because it already happened early, and then it gave back a lot of it. And in fairness, it did still run. Anybody who bought here was still very happy. 50 to 125 is still great. But I think that took away some of the parabolic nature of the run of it going to 130 or 150. I think because we got some of the initial pump early and then some of the assets moved elsewhere, I don't think that it was able to run the same way that it has in the past. Though it did run, it looks like it ran for longer to me. It seems like an equivalent time when you actually measure it, but just visually, this does not look unhealthy to me. It just does look like it kind of petered out early because of this guy. The other reason why this one is important is this is kind of similar to the April sell-off here, where we knew because of how the price behaved there that this level was going to be super important because of these pre-existing candles. So because we spent so much time around here, as well as this is the top of 2021, and that's where we spent a ton of time at. We spent so much time right around that level, right around those levels. So Bitcoin is very loyal to price levels. When it hits a certain price level, it will return to it. Like you can see a lot of these candles close pretty close to each other on either the top or the bottom side. Sometimes both, depending on, there's less instances of that. It's normally, the tops will close and then the bottoms in the next and then the tops in the next. But all that to say that this range here is going to be something where the price needs confirmation of, okay, is this good enough for us to go back up again? Or do we need to test lower? We are in the part of the cycle where it is more likely that we'll need to test lower than regain higher. I don't think that we're going to regain higher until 2027. I said this in the other video, but if I had to sum up the one news story that all the news stations in the world are going to run over the course of 2026, it's how low can Bitcoin go? That's the one story that every news station you'll see run at one point. For 2027, I think the one news story that they're going to run that you're going to hear from all of them at one point is, can the price get back above 100K? That's going to be the main story of 2027. And then 2028 is where we're really going to get back into the possibility of price discovery, especially if it is like this again, where it's like the halving event itself has become more of a catalyst of demand than the post-halving itself, which we don't know. It's too early for us to anticipate that. By 2027, we will start to see the stablecoins come into the market en masse, but by the trillions. So a lot of that money, even if conservatively 20% of that money goes into Bitcoin, it's still going to rocket the price up to the 150, 180 mark fairly quickly. So it's quite possible that 2027 ends emphatically answering that question if it's going to go past 100K and we get back to, the all-time highs already. But that's not my base case. My base case assumption is we're going to chop until around March, and then we're going to fail that 96K pivot and start dropping back towards 80. And then, this is 80 actually. We're going to start dropping back towards 80. Around that time, we're going to really want to pay attention to the shape of this SMA. Has this SMA, you can see it's already kind of starting to flatten a little bit. It hasn't quite curved and started dropping yet, but that's what we're going to be looking for, is when it curves and starts dropping as we're below it. Same thing for this guy. This guy was more steady. I'm not really anticipating that we're similar to 2018, though. I don't think so. I did, like I said, I used 2017 as my model for last year, but I am anticipating more of a 2022 Probably not as dramatic because there were a lot of other things that were happening besides just crypto then. Although we are like the liquidations that were happening at the end of 2025 are similar on the fear and greed index to what was happening in 2022 with FTX and everything else. So that is definitely something to note where there is still a significant amount of fear and uncertainty in the markets. So there's really nothing that could prevent, major failures. But, at this point, we've already given up like a 36% drop. So I don't think it would be unreasonable to anticipate at least another. Oh, didn't mean to press that. Don't know what I just did. At least another 30-ish%, which is, that puts us at 55. I don't think that that's unreasonable for us to see that over the course of the year and potentially lower. But I think the benefit of, like when we saw this, we didn't have any other times on the chart other than those two candles where we were above that. Even those are below that, So we didn't have a significant amount of data and information and human beings putting money into the asset at those levels that prevented it from going back to around those levels. We now have that for the drop here. If we're going to drop below here, that means we've got to say fuck you to everybody who bought in 2021. Not necessarily people who bought in the bear market. People in the bear market are still chilling. They will be chilling. I don't think price is definitely not going to go back down to here. Really, the lowest I can believe it's going to go is like to here, around 45, maybe to the bottom of this channel, like 39. Technically, 39 is the lowest I can believe, but I don't really think it's going to do that. Let's take a look at the anchored VWAP. So this is the anchored VWAP. It's pretty reliable for similar to the SMA. Like once you see that it's below it, it's just historically a legend every time for you to buy more of the asset, whatever the asset happens to be. This may be the last time that it ever touches. It's kind of hard to say. It does look like it's starting to flatten out instead of continuing to expand at the moment. And once it starts to flatten out, that does typically indicate a bear market because price has been expanding, and then it's flat until the price comes and interacts with it. That currently is at about 28K. I don't know if I believe the price is going to go that low. It would still be above the 20K high, which if we kind of think about it cyclically, so 2017, the peak is 20K. What is the bottom in 2022? It's slightly below 20K. Slightly below. Not a ton below, but it is below. So if we're to anticipate this cycle as behaving kind of similar to that, then what we would expect to see is, so that's 2017 to 2022, so that's a 5-year time period. So we would want to look back to 2021. I would assume based on the highest candles is what we want to look at. So this is kind of what I'm talking about here, where it's like somewhere between here and there. I think is likely that we touch that as like a base case. Like it would be very hard for me to believe that that's not going to happen. So I don't know if I expect this to keep being pulled up, or if it's going to stay flat and we just never touched it anymore. There's a possibility that we just never touched it anymore. As you can see over here, we're like down below it for a while, whereas over here we're like about to kiss it and then we're above it and then we kiss it again, but we're gone pretty quickly. So what I would anticipate is if we're going to hit it this time at all, it'll be quick, but probably more realistically, it's going to be above it. It's going to be like this relationship to it instead, which is, let's see, what is that? It's about 30% above it. What's 30% above this guy? Is about 37. So like I said, I can believe around 39 because of the bottom of this channel here, but it would be temporary. It would be like the price would be there for a couple days, less than a week. More realistically, this is the channel that you want to pay attention to. That's the one I think is going to be most realistic. That the price just like is very insecure and needs to know. It needs to know. Like once it retests 80, it'll need to know, okay, do we need to go to 74? Do we need to check 74? If it fails 74, because there's not a ton of people at that level. As you can see, we ripped right through that this second time, and all these people are below it. So there's not a ton of volume that would prevent us, from going lower at that level. It's more realistic that we're going to check like here. This is kind of the midpoint, 63, and that's slightly above those closing candles. Those closing candles are 61 and 59 respectively, right around there. A little bit lower, 61.5, I guess. So those are kind of the ones that I would be expecting for us to interact with. And then it just kind of depends on what else is going on in the economy, and whether or not the housing market continues to rip. It's getting closer to its SMA, but it continues to rip, which is not necessarily the sign that we want for a very, very bullish Bitcoin. It's more likely that people are not going to care about Bitcoin for a little while, and we're just going to have to accept that the price is going to chop and drop. It's going to need to retest these levels here, which I know you don't want to hear, but that's okay. This is to help you strategize, not to be your friend. But yeah, that's what I would be looking at. Is the only thing that's going to prevent us from that is if we can get a strong reaction to 96, that raises us into having a strong reaction to 106.7, and we just stay above it. But that's never happened before on the chart. Once we touch that monthly SMA, we've got to go lower, according to the chart. We don't have any historical precedents otherwise, even all the way to the very, very early one, the 2014 cycle, which kind of similar to now. This is actually more similar to the 2017 one, where there was a couple months where I dropped into it. And we didn't have that. We had a sharp drop. Yeah, you can see a couple drops into it. 2021, it kind of like petered along it and gave it up. But technically, that's also 3 drops that it actually took to get to it. Bitcoin didn't really do that this time. I would consider that 2 major drops. October was very important, because we hit new highs and then we kind of gave it up. So really it happened quicker and more sharply than it has in the past. Instead of it needing to take 3 months to touch the SMA, it only happened in 2. But I do still, this is my base case, is that we're going to chop around there. We don't have any other examples on the chart where we have touched this and then have gone above it. There's no historical precedent for Bitcoin with that. I haven't seen it on any other asset class. So my base case is that we're going to chop around here for a little bit, and then we are going to drop and fail that SMA again and again. In context, anytime you're below the monthly or the weekly SMA is a good time to dollar cost average if you have a long time horizon. If you don't need the money tomorrow, it's a good time to dollar cost average anytime we're below the monthly or weekly SMA. Anytime. You just have to be patient. So this is not something to freak out about. I had a friend yesterday ask me, if I'm someone who has Bitcoin, like, should I be selling it now? And what I told him is, like, it would depend on how much of it I have. If you're someone who has like low 5 figures in Bitcoin, I wouldn't worry about it. I would be focused on trying to make more income elsewhere, as opposed to trying to time exactly when the best time is to buy. Because I really don't know if maybe 73 is the bottom. Maybe we have enough strength up there, and from touching here that the price hits that and then it starts rocketing again. And if you only had a couple months to buy at that level, but you sold 50 or 80% of your stack, you might not get back all of the Bitcoin that you sold in the hope to get profits. I think it makes sense when you have a lot of it. If you have 100K worth of Bitcoin, yeah, bro, sell 10K worth, like to give yourself a little pat on the back for being correct about wherever you happen to buy it. But if you're talking about, less than like $7,000 or $8,000 or more, I just don't think it's enough money for it to be worth you like trying to buy and sell it, instead of just have a strategy for making more money and buying more of it when it's below the monthly or the weekly SMA. And you literally, if you just bought when it was below the monthly or the weekly SMA, you'd be in profit. You'd be doing very well. You wouldn't have to worry about it. Anybody who was buying up here, you just got to wait now. Now you've got to be patient. You've got to be patient until probably over here. 2028 is probably when we're going to see those levels again. Possibility of 2027, but I think 2028 is when we're going to see, renewing of old territory above, say, like 116. I would be very surprised if we see that before 2028. There's a possibility that with the stablecoins in 2027, they just rocket the price of Bitcoin the whole year. But I think, like I said earlier in the video, I think the story of 2026 is how low can Bitcoin go. The story of 2027 is, will it, get back above 100K? And then 2028 will be price discovery. How high can Bitcoin go? And 2029 will be that peak as well. It's my baseline expectation. It's been a couple of years now that I've been fairly accurate about predicting the price of Bitcoin. And thank you so much for just hanging out and being part of the journey. It really helps me a lot to talk it out so that I understand what's happening better. So like and subscribe if you made it this far in the video. And leave a comment down below if you have a certain theory that you want me to explore, a certain part of the chart you want me to look at, or anything like that. Have a wonderful day. And I'll talk to you tomorrow on tomorrow's newsletter.